I originally thought my father hated me, always wanting a son. But fate forces me to live with him, filling my heart with contradiction and unease. However, when I was forced to move into his home, I discovered an astonishing secret to my father and stepmother. Their true identities are not human. Chapter 1 Author's P. O.V. Sky frowned just as the door of the car was opened and the wind hit her face. She didn't want to be here. Her parents had been divorced for as long as she could remember. She lived with her mother. Her mother was a short petite woman. Her father hates her. He always wanted a boy. The news had hit her like a dagger straight through the chest. From that moment onward she had refused to meet him, or acknowledge his presence at all. She didn't want to be a burden on someone. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Her mother didn't know that she had found out the secret she was keeping only to save her from the pain, but she found peace in the painful truth. Her father had remarried and had one stepson, and now she was being forced to move in with his father. His father lived in Basin City with his family. She shared no similarity with her mother, but the same petite frame mother than that she was walking copy of her father. Blonde hair, pale rosy skin and deep blue eyes. Tears came into her eyes as she thought of her mother who passed away 2 weeks ago due to cancer. She had screamed and sobbed as doctors gave her the news. It was difficult, very difficult. She was depressed. Then there was the issue of custody. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. She thought her uncle would be given the custody, but the court had said that her condition wasn't stable and they wanted to hand her over to someone who would keep a close eye on her, and that's when her dad came into the picture, and now, here she is, going to start her life in Basin City, with a father who never wanted her. She looked at her father as she gets out of the car. Followed him was a woman with brunette hair and pale brown eyes in a yellow sundress and flats. Her hair was in a braid. She guessed she was the woman whom her father married. Sky, this is my wife Linda. Her father said. Nice to meet you. Sky said out of courtesy, and the woman grins. To be honest, she seemed more kind and trustworthy than her father. Pleasure, she replied. They look at her smiling and she shyly looks down, not knowing what to do. Let's go inside. You'll love your new room, baby girl. Her father said. Linda, can you please show Sky her room while I pick up Blake from the school? Her father said, and she nods. Enthusiasm, Linda makes her way up a flight of stairs, and Sky noticed that she didn't even flinch during her course as she lifted the 2 heavy suitcases with her. She enters a room whose wall was painted in dark purple. The curtains were a light shade of purple, whereas the queen bed in the middle of the room had a blue bedspread. The room was fairly large with a big window and a big bookshelf. There was a small closet and a door that probably led to a bathroom on the other side of the room. Linda placed the suitcase on the floor. I hope you like your room, Linda said. It's very nice. And thank you for all of this, Sky said when a yawn escaped her lips. Sky mumbled. Okay. Make yourself comfortable, and if you need anything then we will be downstairs. I think I'm going to take a nap, but thank you, Sky said. She stretched as she closes the door. Suddenly she felt as if something was watching her, right through her soul, making a shiver go down her spine. She looked out the window when spots a pair of yellow eyes looking at her, and the next moment it was gone. She thought she's just imagining, so she kept the thought aside, changed her clothes and went to bed. Chapter 2 Author's P. Oh, these skies opened to someone shaking her awake. As soon as her eyes opened, she finally realized that she had a speeding heartbeat. Looking at the person, she relaxed a bit. Hey Linda, Sky says, looking at her. Her voice came out raspy and her throat was dry, not to mention that it felt a bit sticky. Sky, do you mind getting washed up? Your father is having a few important guests over, and I would love to introduce you to them, Linda says. But Sky could sense the nervousness in her voice. Something wasn't right. Sure then, I guess, Sky says, watching the woman leave the room, her suspicious gaze following behind. Linda soon exits the room and closes the door, leaving but a click of sound as the door shut fully. Sky not wasting another minute. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. She lazily walks to one of her suitcases, opening it and fishes for something presentable. Finally finding what she was looking for, she grabs the white and royal blue dress and matching sandals and makes her way to the bathroom to shower. Minutes later, she comes out dressed with her hair blow-dried. She goes to the dresser and pins a few of her strands back and applies some baby pink lip gloss. Not bothering to put on makeup. Taking a deep breath, she looks at the time. 7 in the evening. She examines herself in the mirror. She looks presentable. But that dress had a lot of emotions on her. It was the dress she wore on the day of her mother's birthday. Today is before she died. She twirls in front of the mirror, making her hair flow around her as tears began to fill her eyes, and she shakes her head. No crying, Sky. No more crying. Taking a deep breath, she went to the sofa by the window and makes herself comfortable. Her eyes travel to the dark open space in front of the house. She just sat there watching how the leaves of the trees danced in the strong wind. After about 20 minutes, she heard someone calling her name, bringing her out of her trance. She walked down a few flights of stairs and makes a left to the living room. Her eyes widen as she reached there. Her father had a boy, probably 15, in a headlock while Linda scolded them. "James, let go of Blake before you hurt him." Linda shouts at her husband to let go of the bleach blonde boy while her father just laughed. "Come on, Linda. I'm just showing him how to do it. Besides, he's going to be a beta," her father says, making her furrow her eyebrows. "What's a beta? What's a beta?" Sky asks in a faint voice, and everyone stops dead silent. Her father quickly lets go of the boy. She looks at her father for an answer. "Oh, it's nothing, darling. Let me introduce you to Blake. My stepson," he says, and Sky nods, giving Blake a short wave. "Blake, this is Sky. My daughter. I told you about her, remember?" he says, and Blake nods. "I'm sorry about your mother," he says, and she nods, not knowing what to say. "Blake, go get changed. We are having guests over," Linda says, and Blake raises his eyebrow. "Who exactly?" he asks, and James answers. "Alpha, I mean Liam," he says, quickly eyeing Sky, then back to Blake, who nods. Something didn't feel right. What did he mean by Alpha? After a few minutes of them staring at her, she finally says, "I'll be in my room." And with that she leaves them. They're going into her room, closing the door softly. They were keeping secrets from her, and she knew that. Everything felt blurred and hazy. She frowns when she heard a knock on the door. "Come in," she says as the door opens, and she looks up to see her stepbrother. "Oh, hello," she says, and Blake smiles. "I just wanted to see what you were doing." Blake says, "Nothing," she replies. "Do you mind if I come in?" "Of course not," Sky says. Blake smiles at her as he makes his way to the sofa. He stares at her for a few minutes in the awkward silence. Finally, "I wanted to know more about you, since we're going to be spending a lot of time together. Besides, you must feel pretty awkward and bored here, not knowing anyone. So how about we play 20 questions? Sky asks, and Blake nods. "I'll start. How old are you?" Blake says excitedly, causing her to raise an eyebrow. 17. What about you?" "I'm 16, he replies. "Okay, so what's your favorite color?" Blake asks. "Black," she replies. "It's my turn," Sky says, and he grins at her while she thinks of a question. "Any middle name?" "I'm not telling. It's embarrassing." "Come on. It's not like I'll tell anyone," she says, finally in her comfort zone with Blake. "Leslie," he mumbles. "Wow, Blake Leslie Hudson," she says, and laughs, and Blake groans as James enters the open room. He was dressed in a pair of white shirt and black pants. "Everything's okay here?" her father asks just as the doorbell rings. "I should go get that," he says, and leaves the children there. "Come on. Let's go," Blake says. "Aren't you coming?" he asks as he notices that she didn't stand up from her place on the bed. "Yeah, in a moment." He nods and goes out of the room. After a few minutes, Sky finally decides to go downstairs. As she walks down the flight of stairs, she decides to stop and eavesdrop at what they were saying. Liam. It's so nice to meet you. She hears Linda saying, making her confused at that word again. I'm here to see the human and to make sure she isn't a threat. A voice replies, making her gulp. Don't worry, she isn't. Blake replies for her mother. What do they mean? Chapter 3 Skies P. O.V. I hope, Blake, as your position of the future beta, you'll put the pack first, then your family. Liam replies. Her beta? To my agent extraordinaire, Madeline Milburn. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. You know I respect the position. Blake replies, to which the man whom I assume Liam nods. I can't see his face clearly. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeline Milburn. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. We've to go now. It's an emergency. Liam says, causing my heart to beat quickly. But Alf, my father was cut in between when I heard the front door being opened and Liam leaves the house. Father and Blake follow him out. I make my way back to the top of the stairs and walking down as if I haven't heard their conversations. Who was he? Oh, there you are. Your father, Blake and our guest, had to leave due to some work. Linda says, but I could sense the nervousness in her voice, not to mention the cold sweat on her forehead. Are you all right, Linda? Yeah. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeline Milburn. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. She says and grabs my hand, walking into the living room. Linda let go of my hand, just as her eyes dart to the guy whose back was facing us. Now, who's he? Linda was dead silent as the man turns around and I finally notices his pale blue eyes and strong jawlines. He was lean and dressed in a black fitted suit. His eyes landed on me, then he looks at Linda, who was shaking, clearly intimated by him. What are you doing here, G. Gabriel? Linda asks as the guy starts to walk towards me. My heartbeat quickened as the Gabriel stopped only a foot away from me. He continues to stare at me as he extends his hand out. Gabriel, he says, Guy. I said and shook his hand. His hand feels weirdly cold. His hand traveled to my wrist and grabbed it in a painfully firm grip, while my eyes just widened and I struggled to get my hands out his grip. Gee, Gabriel, what are you doing? Linda asks him. Revenge. He growled as he stared at Linda with his red eyes, and I was beyond shocked at his sudden change of eye color. Please let go of me. I try to get my hand free with my other hand, but that just makes more pressure flow through him and he grabs my other hand in even tighter grip. He was out of control. Tears began to roll down my face as I struggled to get my hands out of his grip. Please help me, I said sobbing while looking at Linda, but all she did was look down at the ground. Shame that she couldn't stand up to the strong, merciless guy. That's when he pushed me with so much force that I hit my head with the wall in front of me and falling on the ground unconscious like a ragged doll. I'll be back. He barks and vanished. Chapter 4 Authors P. O.V. Linda races toward her side and tears fill her eyes as she examines her blue, black, probably broken wrists and the ever-bleeding wound on her head. Sighing, she made her way out of the room, taking out her cell phone, calling the doctor. She sat beside Sky's bed, who was still unconscious, both of her wrists in a brace and her head covered by a band aid. It was shocking and painful for her to admit, but all of this happened to Sky on the first day she moved here. But what worried her more was how she was going to explain what happened to her. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeline Milburn. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. She couldn't give out the secret of this town and risk her head. Taking a deep breath, she covers her face with her hands. What was Gabriel doing here? Enthusiasm. Linda looked at the time on Sky's nightstand, which showed 2 in the morning. James and Blake came home just as the doctor left, and Blake was a bit giddy after she told them about what had happened. Blake checked on Sky twice but was disappointed and a lot scared when he got no response. It was shocking how he had bonded with her in such a small amount of time, and after tonight vowed to never let any harm. After a few more minutes, she hears footsteps approaching Sky's room and looked up to see James in the doorway looking at Sky with sorry. He looks at his wife, who looked like a wreck. Quietly he made his way to stand behind her chair, with his hands on her shoulders. Darling, get some rest. You look tired. he says in a hushed voice, and Linda just nods. Yeah, I'll be there in a moment, she says softly, touching Sky's wrist brace as she hears his footsteps retreat. Sighing, she gives another look at Sky and takes a deep breath before leaving the room, making sure the door was wide open so she could hear Sky if he ever called for her. Meanwhile, in a dungeon, Liam paced in the dungeon, clenching and unclenching his fists, looking at the rogue he had tortured to death. The rogue that had made the mistake to cross Alpha Liam Kane. The realization had finally dawned upon him that his mate was a human. But how could this be possible? Never in centuries had a werewolf been mated with a human. It was impossible. The very first time when he laid his eyes on her, he knew that she's different. She was looking so beautiful and calm while staring out from the window. But when he went to Blake's house, his senses filled with her intoxicating scent, and he was sure that she's his mate. His wolf was restless and wanted to mate with her, but he had to control his wolf. Otherwise he would end mateless. Not that he would let that happen, but he didn't know how long he could keep his wolf down. Any moment his wolf could come out and claim her, killing everyone that comes in his path. Sighing, he finally decided to take a shower and then go to bed. With that he leaves the dungeon, giving a fleeting look at the corpse. At around 7 Then, Sky's eyes fluttered to life as rays of sun beamed down upon her in the room she lay in. She stared at the ceiling of the unfamiliar room inside. Her head was throbbing, making her want to touch it, but as soon as she moved her wrist, she wanted to scream in pain, but she felt like someone her voice. She finally brought her shaking hands to her eyes and they widened. Both her hands were in a wrist brace. How could this happen? She couldn't remember a thing. The last thing she remembered was talking to Blake. Chapter 5 Sky's P. Oh, Fee. I ripped the sheets off my body and found that I was in a dress which was stained with blood. Slowly I get off the bed, making my way to the form at the corner of the room. My head was covered in band. On my head was a bruise on my calf, not to mention the bruise on my upper arm and the wrist braces to top it all off. My hair was matted with blood and looked like a rat's nest. I gave myself another fleeting look before slowly walking back to the bed, flinching at each step. I finally sat down and took deep breathing, trying very hard to remember a single thing, but nothing came. After a few minutes, I hear feet padding on the hallway floor just outside my room, and I turned my head to the door, trying to get a glimpse of the person. Blake gave me a small smile as he saw me. Can I come in? He asked, and I nodded, returning him a smile. So, how do you feel? He asked very gently and slowly while sitting on the sofa I was facing. Like I fell from a building, but no worries. So how much do you remember of last night? Blake asked after a few minutes. Not much. Actually, I was hoping you could tell me. The last thing I remember was us talking, then the doorbell rang and you left, I said, and he takes a deep breath. You slipped and fell down the stairs. That sounds like me. So clumsy. Say you up for breakfast? If you feeling okay to walk? He asked and I nodded, enthusiastically. Yes, please. I'll be down in a moment. Let me clean up first, I said, and he nods. Leaving the room, I made my way to the suitcases, vowing to unpack today and grab a random comfortable outfit with fuzzy bunny flip-flops. Quickly making my way to the bathroom, I showered after stripping out of my bloody clothes. With very difficulty, I might add, because of the broken wrist. My wrist stung even with a slight movement, but I managed. After a few minutes, I came out dressed in a pair of pink and white yoga pants and a loose white top. I clipped my hair into a single messy and twisted bun. I made my way out of the room and glared at the stairs a bit as I made my way down. I noticed that the house was very quiet, which was okay because I had lived in silence all my life, living in an estate without a single friend, a mother who was always sick and an uncle who practically lived with us. Life was great, even though I spent it with practically only 2 people, but it was spent in happiness. I finally reached the kitchen and spot Blake, who was sitting on the counter looking at his phone. He was in his sweats and a t-shirt. He looked up at me and smiled. So, what do you want to eat? He asked, and I looked at him astonished. You know how to cook? Tu m'as agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nobel. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. But Mum and Dad refuse to eat whenever I cook. Some people just don't recognize talent when they see it. He says, swatting his hands like a girl, causing me to raise an eyebrow. I guessed the reason, but was still curious how bad he could cook. French toast, I said, and his face lights up. Coming right up, he said, and finally starts taking out the supplies. So where is everyone? I finally asked, reason being I wanted people in the room to help me if I got food poisoning. Oh, they're all sleeping in. They stayed up late last night. Very worried about you, he said with his back to her as he stirred something. I felt a bit shameful that they went out of their comfort zone for me, but I had no control over what happened, and to be honest, I certainly can't remember falling down a flight of stairs. With that, both of us fell into silence. I was watching Blake cook and he was humming a tune. It was partially awkward. After a few minutes, Blake happily skipped towards me with a plate in his hand and placed it in front of me. My eyes widened as soon as they landed on the food. What is this, Blake? I asked politely, and Blake laughed, patting my shoulder. Your French toast, silly, he replied, and I just stared at the plate. The thing that Blake claimed to be French toast looked like a soggy dark brown mess. How bad can a 16-year-old boy's cooking be? Tell me how they taste, he asked, and I shakily grabbed a fork because I didn't want to hurt his feelings. I stabbed a small piece of the blob and placed it in my mouth. The food tasted horrible. Are you okay, Sky? Blake asked. Wow was all I said. So how was it? He finally asked, and I just looked at him with an uncomfortable expression. I didn't want to hurt his feelings, but at the same time didn't want to lie to him, so finally, I said, I'm lost for words. And Blake's face lit up. I would have hugged you if you weren't bruised up, he said, smiling. I unsurely smiled back and gets up from the stool. Where are you going? Unpacking, was all I replied as I made my way back up the stairs. My appetite completely gone. I closed the door behind me as I entered my room. I looked at the huge suitcases and the 2 cases and the 2 duffel bags at the corner of the room. Sighing, I made my way to the suitcases and unzipped at the very place on the floor. After I had finished unpacking my first suitcase, I was exhausted, my wrists killing me. I groaned loudly as I sat on the floor, leaning on my back against the wall. My eyes began to drop close. I could hear the doorbell ringing, but I was so tired that in moments I was out. Liam's P. Oh, I rang the bell once again, impatiently tapping my foot and looking at my watch. I am a busy man, but never too busy for my beautiful mate, who knew nothing about me. As soon as the door opened, I barged in, not hesitating for a moment, causing Blake to raise his eyebrows. Is there anything you need offer? Blake asked as he looks at me. No. I'm here to check up on you and your family, I replied, taking a deep breath. Letting my mate's intoxicating scent filled my senses. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I'm here to check up on her. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Where is she? She's unpacking and she doesn't remember anything that happened last night. I suggest we keep it that way for some time, Blake said, and I lowly growled. Gabriel is going to pay for it. I nodded and made my way up the flight of stairs, following her scent. In seconds I was standing in front of the door that was practically radiating her scent. I slightly knocked on the door, which I never did before, but I wanted to come off kind and sweet in the first encounter. I knocked once more but didn't get a response. Slowly I opened the door and stepped in, looking through the room. My eyes scanned the unmade bed, and then they landed on a figure on the floor, lightly snoring while leaning against the wall. She was holding what seemed like a dress in her hand as she slept. She was unpacking. A smile made its way on my lips, which is very unusual for me. I need to control myself, but I can't help it. She looked like a kitten. My cute little innocent kitten. I made my way towards her, oblivious that she's a light sleeper. While walking towards her, I stepped on something, making a large squeaky noise through the room. I cursed under my breath. Just as her eyes opened with a jolt and she frantically looked through her room, Just as her eyes land on me, she opened her mouth, and before I could do anything, she screamed loudly. Blake rushed to her room and shakes his head as he saw me gripping my hair in frustration. Why is this person in my room? Sky, this is Alpha. I mean Mr. He was there at our house when you fell and dumb. He helped you, so he was here to check up on you. Blake said, unsurely. Sky, nice name. Is he a doctor? She asked Yes, he's a doctor and was checking up on you. Blake said, Sky's P. I looked at the person, whom my stepbrother claimed to be a doctor. I noticed his tall and well-built figure, emerald green eyes, strong jaw, then his snake-bite piercings, and then my eyes traveled to his exposed arms, which were completely tattered till the knuckles. He didn't look like a doctor. Honestly, he looked like a gangster, but something about him seemed familiar. I took a deep breath and get up from the corner. Well, I'm completely fine, I said, and the person who claimed to be my doctor raised his eyebrows. I don't want to be anywhere near this person. He looks scary. I'll believe that after I've checked you properly. I stiffened at the edge in his voice. He made his way towards me and I took a step back. But then I stopped, taking a deep breath. Our eyes met as he moves towards me, but this time I don't move away as he grabs my hand and undoes the wrist braces, checking my bruised wrists and putting them back on. He does the same with my head. Why is he so close to me? I uncomfortably looked over at Blake, who was not noticing me. You're okay and the braces will be off soon, he said, and leans as if about to kiss me. But he stopped halfway, much to my happiness. I looked at his eyes and they were bright yellow, causing me to widen my eyes. Yellow eyes. I'll see you later, Sky. That's all he said, but it didn't seem like it was his voice. As he left the room abruptly, I stood there stunned for a few minutes, then shook my head, getting back to myself. My feet carried me to my window and I looked out at the open space that was shining underneath the scorching 11 sun. Something didn't seem right. This guy wasn't a doctor. I was sure of that, and I could swear his eyes changed color. But why would Blake lie to me? Something is off about this place and I'm going to find out, but until then I hope I didn't encounter the scary. Did Mr. Kane. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nelban. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Chapter 6, Skies P. Ovi. Rest of the day I unpacked my remaining suitcases while my father and even Linda babied me, practically running after me and getting me anything I wanted, so I didn't have to move at all. It was awkward but very sweet at the same time, but from time to time I'd go and stare at the open space outside my window. Something felt so different, so foreign about this place, as if it was holding a big secret. Blake had left the house somewhere around 1 in the afternoon. It bothered me how calm Dad and Linda were about it, and every time I tried to ask where Blake was gone, I'd get irrelevant or no answer at all. It bothered me that Blake's disappearance didn't bother them at all. I sat on the sofa in front of the window in my room, after having dinner with my dad and Linda without Blake. A book was in my hand, but it had failed to occupy my mind as I peeked at the open space out of my window every once in a while. Something about this place fascinated me, pulled me towards it. I didn't know what it was, but I knew it had something to do with the lies my brother told me. Maybe he lied to me for my own sake, but what possible danger would it be if he had told me the truth? I mean, it wouldn't have mattered if that guy wasn't a doctor, but then there wouldn't be an explanation for him to be in my room. I took a deep breath and looked out of the window again, expecting to look at the same open space, but this time something caught my eye. Just at the edge of the forest, I saw a figure ran by within human speed. Followed the figures were 2 furry dog-like figures. I quickly got up and leaned my torso out of the window, watching the last glimpses of the cat and mouse game before they disappeared from my line of vision. I stayed like that, my torso out of the window, as I looked at the open space with curiosity and tried to make sense of scene that happened seconds ago. What were those things? Sighing, I got in and closed the window but continued to look out. It was dark and silent, the only noise being the faint chirping of the crickets. Minutes went by with me standing in front of the window, looking at the forest, but nothing happened. A yawn escaped my lips and I finally decided to go to when suddenly I heard Blake scream and I saw that afflicting Blake in the ribs. And I noticed that figure was, in reality, a guy, maybe 23. His back was to me but I could still make out his pale skin and inappropriate sense of dressing. The man was wearing a long coat over his hidden attire in the scorching hot night. I watched in horror as the man looked at Blake before taking off his coat and throwing it on the pavement. Rather arrogantly. The back of his white shirt was bloodstained, making my eyes wide and uncausing me to gulp. I was too shocked to move or react. I looked at the man, scared as he cracked his knuckles, causing my heartbeat to quicken. He was about to kick Blake when suddenly he stopped and swiftly turned around. He stared at me but the only thing I could make out about him was his red eyes, pale skin, and his blood-soaked clothes. He grinned at me. An evil grin. Keeping eye contact with me, he reached down to the side of his shoes and took out 2 daggers. As soon as my eyes landed on the shiny objects, I ran downstairs and called for Dad and Linda, but got no response. Nobody was home. Where were they? I need to save Blake. He can't die. I ran towards the guy and Blake and stood in between them. Blake was laying unconsciously soaked in his own blood. "What do you want?" I asked, trying not to cry. "Revenge," he replied calmly. The man waved the daggers at me and smiled innocently. In a flash, he ripped Blake's head off, causing me to yelp as I clamped my hands on my mouth as I took deep breaths, trying desperately to breathe. Even though I succeeded, my breathing was heavy and tears began to stream down my cheeks. "Blake." The guy started to laugh loudly, as if mocking me, making a shiver go down my spine. I wanted to run away, call the police, but it was like as if I was nailed there, paralyzed. I know that I'm going to die soon. Chapter 7 Skies P. Oh, V, I need to get out of here. Oh, you're not going anywhere, my love. You see, darling, you're of quite useful to me and I have some plans for you, he said as if reading my mind, and his teeth extend out. They were sharp like fangs. I was shocked and couldn't leave the man's appearance. He wasn't human, but that was least of my issue as I looked at him for split seconds before running towards the opposite direction, but in seconds I was in the air as he threw me, causing my back to hit against the wall. Every single ounce of oxygen was knocked out from me as I tried to get to my feet. "It's a pity how you humans are so fragile," the guy said. What do you want from me?" I asked him. "Revenge," he said, and grabbed my hand, pulled me up and over his shoulder, but before he could grab my legs, I bring the heel of my foot back hard, hitting his nose here in a satisfying crack. The guy screamed as he dropped me on the ground, gently clutched his nose with the other hand, before letting it go and laughed like a maniac as black liquid rolled out. "Why isn't his blood red? You humans think you're so mighty. Let's see how you get out of this," the guy said, and lunged at me and tackled me to the ground, kicking my stomach with so much force that I rolled in the air and my front hit the wall. I coughed as the man was front of me in seconds, laughed as the blood came from my mouth. "Now be a good girl and come with me, or we could do it in my way," the guy said, and tears began to slide down my face. What are you?" I asked, and he shrugged. "Not human. That's all you need to know for now, love, and just for a heads up, no one is human in this town but you. No one. Keep that in mind while you're here, darling. Now let's get going," the guy said, and without warning grabbed my arm, whirled me up, oblivious that during his blabbing I had grabbed a sharp stone from the ground and without a second thought chucked it into the guy's neck. "You bitch," the guy screamed, barely fazed, but it brought me just enough time to run, ignoring how every inch of my body screamed in pain and agony because of the limit beyond which it was being pushed in this condition. Within a few seconds, the guy was standing right in front of me, and he had his dagger in his hand and was about to stab me when Liam came between us. He was looking furious, but the guy just vanished, giving me a dark look. Not human. Liam's POV. I took Sky back to her home. She was scared. A bit too scared to even move. "What happened?" I finally asked her once she calmed down a bit. I don't know. He just came out of nowhere. He killed Blake. He was so fast and strong with scary red eyes, and he said he wants revenge. Her voice was barely above a whisper because of the pain she was in. She was practically limp on the sofa, looking pale, covered in blood. I took a rag and wiped a bit of blood from her forehead. I felt pity towards the poor broken girl and tried to bring her in for a hug, but stopped as soon as I heard her hiss. How bad was the damage? Hey, it's fine. He won't hurt you anymore, I said and tried to calm her down, and she took a deep breath and looked at the jug of water on the coffee table. I quickly understood and poured her a glass of water and bring it to her lips so she sipped it. Just enough for her throat to get rid of the dryness. Now I want you to take off your shirt so I can look at the bruise. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Milben. Heartfelt thanks to your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Skye, I need to fix you up or it will get worse, I said to her when she doesn't move. You could get an infection if it isn't treated properly. I promise I won't hurt you, I added, and she nods on her judgment. She slowly started to take it off, but due to her pain, she couldn't. I realized it and I grabbed the hem of her shirt, taking it off, leaving her only in pajama and bra. I'd have been turned on if I wasn't too concerned about her. I looked at her torso with sharp eyes. It was horribly bruised with a cut on her side which was left untreated. God, Skye, how did this happen? I whispered, and she looked at the ceiling. He kicked me, she answered simply and flinched when the tip of my fingers brushed against her stomach. So smooth. It's going to be okay. I'll fix you up. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Milben. Heartfelt thanks to your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I found the first aid kit in the kitchen and came back to her. Do you know where Dad and Linda are? No. I can't tell her the truth. Oh, I'm really worried about them, she replied. Now I'm going to clean your cut and it will hurt a bit, okay? I said, and placed the alcohol-soaked cloth on her cut without waiting for an answer, causing her to scream. I continued to work on her side and back, mumbled how sorry I was and that it would be okay while she screamed from the pain. Finally, I was done and she was sobbing. Shit, it's done. It's done, I said and stroked her hair as she quivered. Thank you, she said, and I chuckled. Are you thanking me for hurting you? I asked teasingly. She just smiled. I don't want to be alone, she said, and I looked at her. I'll stay with you if you're comfortable with it. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Milben. Heartfelt thanks to your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Thank you. I really appreciate it, she replied. Do you want me to take you to your room? I asked as I noticed that she was going to pass out any moment. Yeah, but I can't walk, she replied. No problem, I said, and scooped her in my arm, taking her to her room. You're really nice, she mumbled before passing out. Chapter 8. Author's P.O.V. Everything was black and white as if she was in a movie. She looked at her surroundings and she noticed she's in her father's house. But then why was everything monochrome? She heard voices from somewhere downstairs. She follows them out of her room and down the stairs into the black and white living room where a girl stood. She was exactly like her. Same hair. Same everything. She was her. But how could that be possible? She goes to her other body and touches her. But to her surprise, her hand goes right through her. She looked at herself and saw that her reflection was wearing the same white and blue dress she had woke up in, bloodied and bruised on her second day at this place. Linda, she says, going to her stepmother, but she didn't reply. It was like she was a ghost. Was she dead? She didn't remember dying, for the matter. Finally deciding she wasn't, she looked at the scene in front of her. W, what are you doing here, G, Gabriel? Linda asks as the guy walked towards her reflection. Gabriel, the guy says while extending his hands, and Skye watches as her reflection look at it. Then behind him to Linda, who just nodded. Skye. The reflection says, and places her hand in his and traveled to her reflection's wrist and grabbed it in painfully firm grip, making her hiss in pain. Gabriel, what are you doing? Enthusiasm, Linda asks him. Revenge. He growled as he stared at Linda, and there was a sudden change of his eye color. They were red. Skye woke up with a jolt. She was breathing heavily from her mouth and finally looked at her surrounding to find that Liam was gone. He had left early in the morning so he could get ready for his day. Without a second thought, she got up and made her way to her closet. Ignoring her headache and dizzying head, she takes out the dirty blood-stained dress. examines it, and to her horror, the bloodstains were identical to that in her dream. She looked at the bloodstained dress. Just by looking at it she began to feel nauseous, and the next thing she knows is she had thrown the dress back into her closet before rushing to the bathroom, puking her guts out and maybe something more too. It was freaky how she remembered every single detail of that blood-stained dress from her dream. Flushing the toilet, Skye got up and went back to her bed, snuggling comfortably to the covers. Now her mind was whipping up all different types of possibilities. There were mysteries and secret everywhere. She was confirmed for a fact that she was being left out and lied to by everyone. Trust anyone and everyone who was nice to her. Give 100 chances and then get crumbled up and thrown away the very next day. She trusted Blake. The thought of Blake made her sad. She was not able to save him, but she has to be strong for herself, for Linda. But the million-dollar question on her mind was, where would Ad and Linda? Had something happened to them too? She frowned. She was going to give them a piece of her mind when she'll meet them. She jumped in her spot as soon as she hears tapping on her front door. She opens the door. Outside her home stood a man no older than 25 with pale skin. Those were the only things she noticed in her shaken state. "Oh, may I help you?" she asks as she looks at the man. "Oh, I really don't need help." "Love. The question is, do you? You seem awfully lonely here," the person says as she nervously chuckles as she looks behind him. Something about the stranger screamed danger. "Nope. I'm fine," she says, and the man gives her a smile, which looked more sinister than friendly. "Okay, may I ask you a favor?" The guy asks and she nods, just wanting to get away from the guy. "Oh, lovely. I want you to give this to Liam Kane. I bet you know him." The guy asks as he extends an eat envelope towards her. "I'll give it to him," Skye replies, and the guy smiles. "I'm very thankful for your kindness," he says, and is about to go when Skye realizes that the envelope had no name on it. "To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nelben. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing enthusiasm." "But you forgot to write your name on the envelope," Skye says, and the guy turns around. "Don't worry, sweet Skye. I can assure you he'll recognize me," the guy says before continuing to walk, and Skye carelessly nods when suddenly her breathing stops as the guy's words finally registered in her mind, and she quickly whirls around to get a glimpse of the man as her face goes pale from fear. Chapter 9, Part 1. She never told him her name. She went to her room. She was looking at the envelope in her lap. She was tempted to open it, but she would never. That was not her property. But then why would someone involve her in it? Technically, they could have given it to Liam themselves if it was that important. Something was extremely wrong, and Skye couldn't help but wonder that everything was connected. The secrets, the inhuman voices, the quietness, pale figures, inhuman strength. The attack yesterday. She had the answer. She knew what she thought these people were, but she didn't find it logical. Ever since yesterday, her mind hadn't stopped thinking of the words that particular pale guy said before beating the crap out of her. No one's human in this town. The guy even admitted that he wasn't a human, and his appearance proved it to some extent. Then what was he? She closed her eyes, scared, not bothering to move. Suddenly she hears screeching of tires, and she looked out her window to find that a black Lamborghini was parked outside her house. She looked at the letter in her lap and got out of the bed, grabbing it along with her. She opened the door. "Good morning," Liam says, coming to her smiling, but she doesn't reply, her mind still on the envelope in her hand. He noticed her nervousness but didn't say anything. "Are you all right?" he asks her, and Skye come out of her trance. "Sorry, oh yeah. I'm fine. Is there anything bothering you?" Liam asks, and Skye stares at him for a moment before looking at the envelope and extending it to him. "A guy came a few minutes ago. He told me to give this to you," she says as Liam looks at the envelope, his features getting hard as he took it from her. "Did he told you his name?" he asks as he opens the envelope. "No, he said you'll recognize him," Skye says, watching Liam's eye go dark as he scans the page before he looks back at her. He never expected this to happen. It was too soon, but they didn't have time. If he let her in dark any longer, his pretty little mate would be used against him. "Skye, we need to leave." Liam says he rips the paper and let it fall to the ground while Sky looks at him bewildered. J benign. Carter offers P. Oh, excuse me, she says as Liam's eyes dart around searching for the person who gave Sky this envelope. Get in the car, he says as he grabs her arm and Sky flinches. Let me go, she says struggling, but Liam drags her to his car and quickly pushes her on the passenger side, slamming the door shut before getting in the driver's seat in super speed and starting the car. What are you doing? Sky asks and Liam looks at her. She was crying, but Liam doesn't answer her as he takes out his cell phone, dialing his gamma's number. To my agent extraordinaire, Mythical Noble. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Jake says, his voice tired from working all night. Jake, send a team too. Jake, help me. Sky screams, cutting him off. Liam glares at Sky as she continues to scream for help before he stops the car and slams his other hand on her mouth. He was furious, but not at her. He could never be mad at his little angel. Now, as I was saying, send a team to get the town sealed. No one gets in and no one goes out. Put everything on high alert, he says before ending the call, waiting for an answer. Alphas proved to be very possessive and were never the patient type. When it came to their mates, their possessiveness was 1,000 times more, but Alpha Liam was a dangerous exception. He wasn't only extraordinarily strong but also merciless. He never once spared a trespass without an explanation. This was the reason there weren't any humans in this town, its occupants only being werewolves. Now why did you scream? Liam asks softly as he looks at the tear-stamped face of the girl beside him. Removing his hands from her mouth, he waits a few seconds, but when she doesn't reply, he sighs. I know you're scared and that's okay, but I'll never hurt you. I know I'm taking you by force, but that is only so I can explain to you what's going on. I know you want answers and I'm willing to give them to you, but you need to cooperate. Liam says, but Sky doesn't reply as he starts the car and began to drive. Sky takes deep breaths, giving fleeting looks to Liam every once in a while. She didn't know what was going on. She was scared. Suddenly the car stops in the middle of the deserted road with forests on each side, drawing Sky's attention to Liam, who was clenching and unclenching the steering wheel in nervousness. Come on, he says gently before getting out of the car, and Sky followed, not wanting him to hurt her. Where are we going? Sky asks him after a few seconds of following through the forest. Not that she expected an answer. To her surprise, he answered her. There's a clearing in here. We need to go there, he says, and Sky's curiosity rises, but she doesn't question as they walk through the dense forest. It was thick and the trees were more closely packed together with wild plants growing. This was nature in its rawest form. After a few minutes, the forest began to thin out and they stood in the middle of a gorgeous clearing with lush green and purple flowers covering it. Liam stood with his back facing to Sky, taking deep breaths. This was it. Now or never. Sky, would you believe me if I told you I'm not a human? He says, now facing her. Both of them only inches apart. Sky stops breathing and looks at him. She didn't know what to say. She didn't have an answer. What are you? To my agent extraordinaire, Mythical Noble. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. To my agent extraordinaire, Mythical Noble. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Her instincts screamed at her, but she wouldn't word that out loud. I know you have a theory, Sky. I want to hear it before I reveal you the secret that everyone has been keeping from you. Your father, Linda, Blake, this town. It's all born to this one little piece of information. Liam says and twirls a lock of her hair between his fingers. She stood there like a statue, not breathing, not saying a word. Come on, Sky. Liam says his hands went down his side and he took a step back to give her some space as he urged her to tell him. She took a shaky breath and looked anywhere but him, so she didn't have to meet his intent gaze. When I moved here, I thought this town was ordinary, but they're only a week after I started to notice strange things. Inhuman growls. Extraordinary strength and speed, along with uncomfortable looks at me if I was out of the box. I heard these strange terms people called each other, but what caught my attention was what you were addressed as. What was that word? Oh yes. Alpha. I did a bit research here and there and I got nothing but the facts that in a community of animals, mostly wolves, the individuals hunt and do tasks together in a pack with the leader called Alpha, and then yesterday that guy killed Blake in front of me. Sky stops and looks at Liam, who is giving her a fawn. You're close. Continue. He says, and Sky looks at him dead in the eyes. I've seen everyone in this town work collectively, keeping to each other. I think that you and everyone in this town have wolf-like instincts. Their strength, speed. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeline Nilbay, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Sky says. And Liam questions. You're their leader. Sky replies, looking at his expression. Both of them stay silent, looking into each other's eyes as Sky feels that her heart was going to jump out. Finally, she closes her eyes and waves her hand in the air dismissively. This is just a stupid theory. It's nothing, Sky. Liam cuts her off, but she doesn't listen. No, it was just as stupid. She continues to rant when Liam lets out a loud wolf-like howl, and Sky looked at him shocked. His eyes were yellow and he was breathing heavily. Sky, we don't possess wolf instincts because we are them. We are werewolves. Liam says, but it wasn't his voice. The voice was deep and hissing. It was scary and low. Sky began backing away as she looked at him with fear in her eyes. She wasn't prepared for this. Was he going to eat her? Why, you're not completely a wolf. I mean, why, you are a bit human. Sky says, stumbling upon her words as she tried to buy herself some time and find some sort of defense, but there was none. Giving into her instinct, she turns around and tries to run away when she saw him. Blake. Chapter 10, Part 1, Author's P. Oh, D. Blake, Sky screams. I forgot to mention one tiny detail, Liam says, and roughly turns her around. What was he doing? She needs to go to Blake. He's alive. Sky, he's not Blake. Stay away from him, he says, and his eye starts to change color again. What do you mean? And what tiny detail? Sky asks. On cue. His backbone bends to a painful angle and she hears cracking of bones. Out of instinct, her hands clamped on her mouth as she watched him grow out of his clothes, leaving them in shreds. Black fur grew on his skin, and no later a very big and very black werewolf stood in front of her. The wolf's gaze was intent as he watched her every move. No, she says, shaking her head as she staggered away from him, cutting her palm on the sharp rock underneath her. Blake walked near her and she let out a loud sob. Stay away from me, she sobs, not caring about her bloody and bruised hand. Trying desperately to get up but failing miserably. The effect of painkillers had worn off and now she was hurting. She gives up and begins to cry on the ground, looking at the dark wolf and Blake, who are now looking at each other. She can't trust anyone. She's confused. She's going to be dog food. Blake ignores her and continues to come near her, and she sobs louder with each step. Please don't hurt me, she says, and tries to roll away, but Blake puts his foot on her shoulder, preventing her. Dear, your little mate is going to pay for your mistakes, Blake says, when suddenly Liam's large wolf burst out, killing Blake, causing a yelp from Sky. Sky looks into his eyes with nothing but fear and begins to thrash while Liam gets on top of her, trying to lick her face to calm her down, but nothing worked. She screamed from pain, and Liam finally realized his mistake and got off, nudging her side, and she screamed again. Gee, get her away, she sobbed, and she began hyperventilating. Liam's eyes filled with worry as Sky's bloody hands went to her throat. She desperately tried to breathe, to get any source of oxygen into her aching lungs. Liam nudges her side, and she tried to scream again, but nothing came out of her mouth as her eyes rolled back in her head and her body relaxed. Liam is not going to let him hurt his mate again. He's going to kill him. Chapter 10, Part 2. Author's P. Oh, V. Sky woke up gasping for air. She wasn't a fool to forget the event that happened prior as she scanned the room she was in. It wasn't hers. To be honest, a room like this didn't even belong in her house. It was too dark. The walls were grey, whereas everything else that inhabited the room was black. She was lying on a soft bed with silk black sheets and a comforter draped over her. There was no question on who brought her here, but what he wanted to do with her was the real thing on her mind. Would he kill her? Tears filled her eyes as she lay back down on the bed and covered her head with the comforter, which gave her some feeling of safety. Silent tears fell down her cheeks as she closed her eyes, shut, letting her thoughts consume her. Maybe this was a death presenting itself to her. But she doesn't want to die. There was so much she hadn't done yet. She got up from the bed, removing the sheets from her body when she realized she wasn't in her clothes. Her heart began to pound even louder when she realized that. Who could have changed her? She looked down at herself once more and saw she was in a huge shirt and a pair of boxers. Both of them smelled like cologne. Very strong and familiar cologne. Liam. Maybe he did something to her. Dizziness took over her as she grabbed the bedpost for support and slid down on the floor. Grabbing her head in her hands, sobs began to rack through her petite body. She sniffed every now and then until she felt tired, but even then content to leave this place. She finally gets up, tears still flowing down her cheeks as she went to the dark room to the door. No need to think of anything drastic. The front door seemed like an easy idea. She would just need to get out of this room and find her way through the house. If someone stops her, she could just ask them the reason for being held. Hostage. Easy peasy. Skye pepped herself as she took deep breaths and turned the doorknob and sighed from relief when it turned and the door opened. Taking a deep breath, she looked out to a long staircase which led to a wide hallway. The lights were off and the only source of guidance was the moonlight that peeked through the windows. Sniffling, Skye slowly padded down the stairs, gripping the railing. She was lucky that the floor was carpeted. She looked beyond at the hallway which turned to the right. There were 8 rooms in this single long hallway, for on each side there was a large grandfather clock against a wall which was striking 2 in the morning. Maybe this wasn't her best idea. What if she got lost? But then she didn't want to stay another minute in that room like a pretty little princess waiting for Prince Charming. All defenseless for someone to come do something to her. Murder. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nobel. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Skye shuddered as she quickly passed the hallway and turned right to find another 8 set of rooms, but paintings covered the walls here. She wondered how big the house was and why would Liam need such a big house. She was tempted to open the rooms but didn't abide by her thoughts. She was on limited time right now. After many twists and turns, Skye found herself wandering another hallway. She had gone down another flight of stairs and she wondered how much more to go. She walked through the hallway and to the left, and to her surprise, unlike all the others' hallways that had 8 rooms, this particular had only 1. The walls of the hallway had no decoration whatsoever and dim orange light peeked from under the door frame. Someone was in that room. Skye covered her mouth with her hand and tiptoed towards the door, staying glued to the opposite end of the wall so she doesn't cast a shadow on the ground and give away her presence. She fucking fainted, Linda. I expected her to take it that bad, but she fainted because I came close to her. Because she was fucking afraid of me. She's my mate. How can she low? She hears a familiar growl and her breathing stops in her throat as soon as she hears Linda's name. Give her some time, Liam. She needs to come to terms with this information. What do you expect? She just found out that every living soul in this town is anything but human. Not to mention half-dogs. She'll come through sometime. Besides, she would faint when, Linda says, but Liam shushes her. Sure. Do you hear that? Liam asks and Skye's heart beats faster. What are you talking about? Linda asks and Liam takes a deep whiff. She's here. Liam says and Skye stiffens completely. She was caught without even making a sound. Their instincts must be very sharp. Skye, you can come in. Linda says and Skye begins to dwell upon her options. She could either go through the door and face them, or she could either run in the opposite direction. Get out of the house and most probably to her freedom. Skye, I'm going to count till 3. Liam said and Skye stiffens 1. He says and she stares at the door. Till Liam continues and Skye takes a deep breath. Liam says and she hears footsteps approaching the door in front of her. Being the oh-so-logical person she was, just as Liam opened the door she began to sprint in the opposite direction. Skye, someone shouts, but it wasn't Liam. The voice didn't belong to Linda either. She turned another corner and found herself in another unfamiliar hallway. Distressed tears ran down her cheeks. She should have just went through that door and faced them. Now she's being chased by her so-called stepmother and Liam. She hears the footsteps gaining on her, and just as she turns the corner, a hand reaches out and grabs her by her upper arm, pushing her into themselves. A sob escaped her lips as she struggles in the person's hold. "Someone please help," she begins to say, but a hand on her mouth cuts her off. "For the love of God, please be quiet. People actually sleep this early in the morning," the same unfamiliar voice says, removing his hand from her mouth, and soon escaped her lips as she looked in front of her. There in front of her eyes stood Liam and Linda, while her captor remained unknown to her. "Please don't eat me. I swear I won't taste any good," she says hurriedly as her blood-red eyes traveled from Linda to Liam. Their expression changed before the man holding her burst out in laughter, letting her go. Taking this as her chance, Skye quickly makes a distance between her and that unknown guy. She hugged herself in an attempt to stop herself from shaking as she looked at Linda with pain. She had betrayed her as she did nothing but stood and stared back. Her eyes traveled to Liam, who was glaring at the guy laughing behind her. Skye looked at that guy. He had messy blondish hair with an oval face and piercing blue eyes which all seemed very foreign. "God, she got humor, Alpha," he said, looking at Liam while whipping a straight air before he looks at her. "And to answer your question, I can assure you no one will eat you. You humans taste awful," the guy said, and Skye pales. "Stop messing with her, Ruben. She's going to faint." Liam growls at Ruben as her lower lips quiver from fear. "Skye, I can assure you none of us has ever eaten a human," Liam says as his eyes travel up and down her body. She looks sexy in his clothes. Skye notices and hugs herself tighter before looking at Linda. "I want to go home now. Right now," she whispers, and Linda looks towards Liam, whose eyes darken. "Skye, you remember how your father and I have been busy," Linda begins uncomfortably, and Skye looks at her hurt. "I'm not asking you to drop me or anything. You want to stay here. That is really cool for me. But I did imply that you show me the front door so I can help myself back home," she says, and looks at the clock behind them. "It was 4 in the morning, and any time the sun would begin to rise. That's not what I meant, but the thing is you can't go home. Not now and alone. We'll explain everything to you. Now let's get you back to the office, and Liam will explain everything to you before anyone else decides to wake up," Linda says, giving a pointed look to Ruben, who just raises his hands up in surrender. "Not my fault. I came to help," Ruben says before going back down the hallway, leaving her with Linda and Liam. "Come on, Skye, let's go," Linda says, but Skye shakes her head. "I want to go home. You can explain there," she says, and Linda sighs before looking at Liam, who nods before grabbing her upper arm and dragging her to the office with one of his hands clamped on her mouth as she screamed into it. Enthusiasm, Linda sighed and had gone to the other side of the hall, leaving her alone with Liam as he dragged her to his office.